we have to say while we draw breath. Distress caused this untimely death. The government opposed must be. Well, we set off at sunset. At first we were brisk and moving fast and knocking on doors, forcing farmhouse doors open, taking any guns they had and leaving with the men pressed into our column. Early on, though, we came to the house of Widow Hepworth, and things began to go against us.
I am Mary Hepworth, widow of Joseph Hepworth. I have 2 grown-up sons, Francis and William. Francis came to me and said he had been accosted by the Turners at the inn in South Wingfield. They had warned him that he must join the rising when they came to our farm for guns. Francis had refused to have anything to do with it and said he'd report them to Colonel Halton. The Turners got angry and promised that when the rebels called at our farm, Francis was a dead man. I sent him away to relatives who lived at Melbourne until the trouble was over. At about midnight, there was heavy knocking at the door. I gathered my son William, my daughter Emma, and our 2 labourers, Robert Fox and Robert Walters, in the kitchen and refused to open up. Those outside battered the kitchen door with what sounded like huge stones. Some went around to the side windows and succeeded in smashing an opening through them. Someone yelled, "Surrender your men and your guns." Then a shot was fired. Emma and I screamed, and Robert Walters fell backwards over the bench he had been sitting on to tie his shoes. He was mortally wounded. Poor Robert Walters died in my arms.
Well, from Mrs. Hepworth's we kept on knocking on doors and pressing men to come with us, but our hearts were heavy with the taking of an innocent life. And we were looking at the captain in a different way, and I realised he couldn't have done a lot of soldiering. I tried to get Isaac to take a gun, but he wouldn't. So I made him carry a spear, but he didn't want to do that either. He didn't really belong in such a violent gathering. It was a bad plan. We spent too much time, and we knew we'd never reach Nottingham when we should. And then the rain was pelting down. I hadn't felt as wet or miserable since fighting all those years ago in Holland. We rallied at Pentridge, and then we found those lazy Pentridge lot hadn't rousted the local farms like they were supposed to, and Tommy was nowhere to be seen. We had to spend 2 hours doing their job for them, and that made us badly late. Finally, we came down the hill to the road in front of the Butley Ironworks. We knew there were constables inside, defending it. They'd been sworn in by the company the day before. We drew up our lines, and then the works manager, George Goodwin, came out to fess us.
The insurgents came forward in good order, in a line formed 2 deep, opposite the office, extending in a curve from the front of the garden wall to the doors of the foundry yard, which was shut. The fellow at the head, who acted as chief, gave the words, "Halt! To the right, face front." He was a thin little man, apparently not 30 years of age, and was dressed in a long brown coat and armed with a gun and pistols. He knocked with the butt end of his gun against the yard doors. I went to the office doors and asked, "What do you want? What is your object here?" He answered, "We want your men." I replied, "You shall not have them. You are too many except your purpose was better. Disperse. The law will prove too strong for you. You will all be hanged."
Well, we kept out the centre of Ripley so as not to meet any more constables, and we took the Nottingham road. Many of the men were grumbling, the rain was pouring down, and by the time we reached Codner, some of them were ready to mutiny. So the captain allowed them to stop for half an hour, and we woke up the local landlords and demanded ale. and that included the glass house at Codner, where Mrs. Thorpe is the landlady.
It was the middle of the night when we were roused from our beds by a loud hammering on the door and sounds of a lot of men shouting. My husband John went down, and soon our barroom was full of armed men, soaked to the skin and shouting for ale. One of them made a speech about how the government had robbed them and they must either fight or starve. The leader ordered half a pint of ale and bread and cheese for each man. The bill came to 28 shillings. I asked him for payment. He was a little man wearing an apron, and he said the new government would pay us. I told him he should pay up now, or I doubted we'd ever get paid. And do you know what he said? If we offered you a Bank of England note, it will be of no use now.
Well, we had a real job on to get the men out the inns and back in line once they were drinking. And by the time we got to Langley Mill, it was nearly dawn. The captain had sent George Wakeman, Tommy Bacon's nephew, up the road to Nottingham to see how things were there. He met the leader of the Nottingham men and came back with news that all was going well and we must come on. But we didn't know he'd been lied to. We began to set off again, but many of the lads were starting to desert. We just about held it together until Eastwood. We'd marched 13 miles, and then there were rumours of soldiers, and somebody saw them. The captain tried to form a line. A few of us stood, but most turned tail and ran. There were barely a dozen soldiers. We could have took them easy if our courage had held. The 15th Light Dragoons had fought with them in Holland, and they weren't any good. But they charged once, and we were routed. Our army scattered everywhere. Well, me and Edward got clear and started to work our way home. But before we got to Codner, we were discovered hiding in a ditch by the yeomanry. Yeah, we put up a bit of a struggle, but they took us. And the next stop was Derby Jail. Many of the lads joined us there. But the captain, Tommy, and his brother John, and Isaac Ludlam and George Wakeman had all got away. The Chesterfield Yeomanry, Colonel Alton at the helm, wrecked our homes and frightened our families, looking for weapons. It was Elishot that summer, and by the time everyone had been captured and confined with the rest of us, we were in an awful state. All we had was bread and water. We were wasting away until Mr. Eaton, the jailer, he told the government solicitor that we'd be dead before they got us to trial. And then we got vegetables some days and once in a while a little meat. That jail was built for 20, but there were 60 of us. We couldn't lie down to sleep. We had to sit leaning up on the next man. And we'd no soap, so we stank in our soiled clothes. When they brought the captain in after he'd been on the run for 6 weeks, they put him and me and a few more in full irons. And we couldn't even reach far enough to scratch the lice out of our hair. In the early days in jail, when me and my brother were caught and the captain and Bacon were on the run, we hated them both with a fury. It was Tommy who talked us all into this. It was the captain who'd messed everything up on the march. He had led us into a trap with his poor soldiering. But then they brought the captain in. He'd got as far away as Bristol, found a ship for America, but didn't sail. He came back to Nottingham and was sold out by his best friend, who turned out to have been a paid spy all along. He never told us why, but we came to believe that he just wouldn't desert his family and his comrades. He were a tough man, all right. Never heard him moaning about his fate. He drove Mr. Pickering, the chaplain, mad because he wouldn't repent what he'd done or pray with him. He didn't talk much. He kept his own counsel. And I liked that. Very soldierly. Well, Tommy and his brother led the constables a merry dance, because Tommy had arranged with his many friends throughout England to report sightings of him. And the constables were flying everywhere, but they were caught and added to our numbers. And Tommy weren't all that popular when him and his brother John were brought in. He was still all talk. But we had a laugh when he was cursing the blacksmith who was putting the irons on him, and Mr. Eaton, the jailer, said it wasn't wise to upset the only man in Derbyshire who could take the irons off again. Back home, our families were destitute. But bless them, they worked hard. They sold everything we had to raise money to pay for lawyers to defend us.
We've all thought for weeks what can be done. We've sat together many a night. But truth is, there ain't a thing we can do. It's money we need, right enough. Something we've got none of.
We should get out in villages and collect money, beg in streets if we have to.
That's all very well, Mrs. Wakeman, but none of us is prepared to beg. Our husbands, sons, they wouldn't want it, no matter how bad things get. I know Isaac won't let me beg.
Isaac isn't here to stop you. None of them are here. We make our own decisions now. And if there's a woman in this room who'll follow pride before her wifely duty, I'll turn my back on her.
So what do you think we should do?
I just thought if we women, and the children too, if we give ourselves set places to go, we could shame folk into helping us.
They wouldn't let us do that. They'd arrest us as beggars. Next thing we'd know, we'd be in prison with them.
Derby jail's already full. There's a lot who think our men have been treated badly. They wouldn't dare lock up the wives as well.
All right, I'm with you, Mrs. Wakeman. Something else and all. Isaac and my sons are sleeping sitting up on pallets of dirty straw, 8 to a cell. I'm sleeping in a comfortable bed. That no longer seems right to me. Tomorrow, I'm going to sell that bed and any other bit of furniture that might raise anything and put money in fund for their defence.
Well, they raised over £100 for our defence. Enough to pay for the lawyers and for the expenses of witnesses who might stand for us. But our lawyer, John Cross, demanded a fee of £100 in advance. We'd no option but to pay him, and we'd now left. Later, a lawyer from Nottingham called Thomas Denman offered to help without a fee, so we had 2 lawyers. Only one of them was a crook. Then in October, they took us to the Derby courthouse, and we were indicted. We stood there, stinking in our rags, filthy, skin and bone, while the chief baron, the head judge, read out the indictment.
You, together with a great multitude of false traitors, whose names are to the said jurors unknown, to the number of 500 and more arrayed and armed in a warlike manner, that is to say with swords, pistols, clubs, bludgeons, and other weapons, did then, with great force and violence, parade and march in a hostile manner in and through diverse villages, places, and public highways, and did then and there maliciously and traitorously attempt and endeavour by force of arms to subvert and destroy the government and constitution of this realm by law assembled.
Well, I was tried as one of the leaders, along with the captain, Isaac and George Wakeman. They said me and Isaac had acted as officers, because I walked at the side of the ranks and sometimes at the head with the captain, and Isaac had kept the back of the march together, and George had been the captain's messenger riding ahead of us. The way these lawyers spoke, the words they used, the way they went right back into history to make their arguments left my head in a spin. But I understood the witnesses easy enough, all of them angry with us, all of them making up false stories to show us up in a bad light. I'd never hurt anyone. I just did my duty. The famous Henry Hunt was in court. He had a lot to say about the jury.
The means taken to procure tractable juries were the most barefaced and abominable, and jurors were mostly selected from amongst the tenantry of the Duke of Devonshire.
The captain, was indeed a most extraordinary character. There was a wild daring in his look, a desperate decision in his manner, and a furious energy in his conduct which bespoke the man capable of a commanding influence upon minds.
That was his own lawyer talking about Brandreth. At the end, the jury took less than half an hour to find him guilty of high treason. I was next. The jury just took 15 minutes to find me guilty. Isaac was tried after me and the result was the same. But one man on George's jury held out for him and was prevailed to pronounce him guilty with the rest. But the jury recommended that George be spared the death sentence. Now, our lawyer Cross blamed the government for letting us read Cobbett's Twopenny Trash.
The most wicked and diabolical publications that were ever addressed to man.
And then he made merry about how...
What weapons did the men have with them to effect such a bloody revolution? The infantry? That formidable body of infantry was armed with a dozen fowling pieces and 20 pikes. And what was the extent of their cavalry? They had provided themselves with a pony. That was the entirety of their cavalry. As to ammunition, a single parcel of bullets was all that has been exhibited. And one man, a pauper from Nottingham, has been styled their Generalissimo.
A £100 lawyer's defence was, we were guilty. And we were being talked into doing what we did by the captain, but we only knew him 2 days before he went on the march. Our lawyers had spoken with us. Oliver's role in urging people to rise up had been discovered by a reporter in Yorkshire. It was the talk of the nation, with the newspapers saying he was in the pay of Lord Sidmouth, the Home Secretary. Of course, the noble lord denied this. Mr. Oliver took no part in any plots. He came to the Home Office at the beginning of April 1817 and offered information which he considered beneficial to the country, but which he had not obtained by being implicated in any conspiracy. Deny he might, but if Oliver were brought to the witness box under oath, he could have pointed a finger at the whole government for tricking us into rebellion. If Tommy were brought to trial, he'd have told them all about Oliver and how he persuaded everyone that we've got to come out and support the National Rising. So he made a deal with the government lawyers. The captain and his chief lieutenants, me, Isaac and George, we'd all be prosecuted, but none of us had met Oliver, so we wouldn't be brought into it. The younger lads would be freed without charge, and if Tommy Bacon and some of the older ones pleaded guilty, they'd be spared execution. So they pleaded guilty and were all sentenced to death, but that was immediately reduced to transportation to Australia for most of them and prison for some. But the captain, Isaac, George and me, we were to die because, well, somebody had to. We were identified as leaders and we were to be sacrificed to save the rest. And the Chief Baron put his black cap on.
Your insurrection, thank God, did not last long. But whilst it continued, it was marked by violence and with the murder of an innocent man who did not offer the least provocation. That conduct so showed the ferocity of your hearts. Your object was to wade through the blood of your countrymen to extinguish the law and constitution of the country and to substitute for the liberty of your fellow subjects anarchy and the most complete ruin. God be praised, your purpose indeed failed. Each of you to be taken hence to the jail from whence you came, from whence you must be drawn on a hurdle to the place of execution, and there to be severally hanged by the neck until you are dead. Your heads must then be severed from your bodies, which are to be divided into 4 quarters and to be at his Majesty's disposal.